Kyoto, June 1582. The night was heavy with rain, but inside the temple of Honnoji, Oda Nobunaga slept lightly. He was never a man at peace, not even when silence draped the city like a shroud. Nobunaga had carved his name across Japan in fire and blood, slaughtering rivals, razing temples, crushing all who stood in his path. Some called him a visionary. Others whispered a darker title: the Demon King of the Sixth Heaven. As dawn broke, a thunder not from the sky but from the streets shook the temple walls. Steel on steel. Shouts of men. The crackle of fire. Nobunaga rose from his bed, realizing too late the unthinkable. This was no enemy invasion. It was betrayal. His own general, Akachi Mitsuhide, had turned against him. The temple was surrounded. Escape was impossible. Nobunaga, ever defiant, refused to be paraded as a captive. He ordered his attendants to set the temple aflame. The fire licking the painted screens and wooden beams. Surrounded by smoke and screams, he drew his blade for the last time. In that moment, the man who nearly united Japan chose death over disgrace. Seppuku, in the heart of Kyoto. His ashes scattered with the embers of the burning temple. And outside, Akachi Mitsuhide smiled grimly, whispering words history would never forget. The enemy awaits at Honnoji. A dynasty ended in betrayal, and in its ashes, Japan's fate twisted once more. History is more than just dates and names in dusty books. It's a shadow stretching across time, full of secrets, tragedies, and whispers that refuse to die. This is Morbid History with Thomas Gloom. The Sengoku period of Japan, the age of warring states, was a century of chaos. From the mid-1400s to the early 1600s, Japan was fractured into dozens of domains, each ruled by a daimyo, a warlord, a feudal lord, each clawing for more power, more land, more prestige. Alliances were made and broken as easily as promises. Battles raged across valleys and mountains, towns and temples. The old order crumbled, and in its place, only one rule remained. The strong would survive, and the weak would be erased. Out of this blood-soaked storm rose a man whose very name would terrify monks, warlords, and peasants alike. His name was Oda Nobunaga. Some would call him a revolutionary, a man who dragged Japan into the modern age. Others would call him a butcher, a tyrant, a demon. Nobunaga preferred that last title. He even adopted it himself. Mao Darakuten Nao, the Demon King of the Sixth Heaven. A ruthless rise. Nobunaga was born in 1534, heir to a minor domain in Owari province. From the beginning, he was different. While other lords clung to old traditions, Nobunaga embraced innovation. He wore Western clothing, traded with Europeans, experimented with new weapons, especially the arquebus, an early firearm brought to Japan by Portuguese traders. Where others saw dishonor in firearms, Nobunaga saw efficiency. Where others saw sacred temples, he saw potential fortresses to burn. In 1560, he proved his worth on the battlefield at the Battle of Akeyazama. Vastly outnumbered, his army of 2,000 against 25,000, Nobunaga struck a daring surprise attack against Imagawa Yoshimoto, one of the most powerful warlords in Japan. Imagawa was slain, and Nobunaga's legend was born. This victory wasn't just luck, it was vision. Nobunaga understood that in war, boldness could outweigh numbers, and he would apply that lesson again and again as he clawed his way toward domination. The Demon King emerges. But it wasn't just his military brilliance that set him apart. It was his ruthlessness. One of the most infamous episodes came in 1571, at the siege of Mount Hiei. We'll look at this a bit more later in the episode, but for now, I'll give a brief overview. The warrior monks of Enryakuji Temple had opposed him, lending their support to his rivals. Nobunaga's answer was merciless. He surrounded the temple complex, set it ablaze, and slaughtered thousands. Monks, women, children, everyone. The smoke of Mount Hiei darkened the sky for days. Survivors spoke of rivers of blood. Nobunaga had not just defeated an enemy, he had annihilated them. This brutality earned him his nickname as the Demon King. But in Nobunaga's mind, he was simply clearing the old world to make way for the new. He crushed rivals one by one. The Takeda clan, legendary for their cavalry. The Asakura and Azai clans, who betrayed him in battle. Even those who swore loyalty found themselves destroyed when they outlived their usefulness. To Nobunaga, Japan was not a land of lords. It was his land, waiting to be united under his iron hand. Nobunaga the Modernizer. And yet, Nobunaga was not just a killer. He was a visionary. He encouraged trade, especially with Europeans importing guns, Western armor, and even Christianity, though only as a useful tool against Buddhist power. He rebuilt infrastructure, opened markets, standardized taxes. He dreamed of a Japan no longer bound by the endless squabbling of daimyos, but a centralized state, efficient, modern, powerful. In many ways, he was ahead of his time. But ambition alone does not secure history. For every battle he won, every temple he burned, every rival he executed, Nobunaga was making enemies. And one of them was closer than he realized. The betrayal at Honnoji. By the early 1580s, Nobunaga stood on the brink of total unification. Only a few major clans remained, and victory seemed inevitable. But in June of 1582, fate, or treachery, struck. On June 21st, Nobunaga was resting in Kyoto at the temple of Honnoji. He was accompanied by only a small retinue, his main army scattered, his generals campaigning elsewhere. That morning, news arrived. One of his trusted generals, Akachi Mitsuhide, had suddenly turned. With an army of 13,000 men, Mitsuhide marched on Kyoto, surrounding the temple. Caught off guard, Nobunaga was trapped. His guards were cut down. The temple set ablaze. Nobunaga fought as best he could, but defeat was certain. Rather than allow himself to be captured, humiliated, or paraded by an enemy, he committed seppuku, ritual suicide, inside the burning temple. His attendants followed, ensuring his body would never be found intact. The man who nearly unified Japan ended not with conquest, but with betrayal. Why did Mitsuhide betray him? The question that haunts historians is, why? Mitsuhide had been a loyal retainer. Nobunaga had rewarded him with land and status. And yet, on that June morning, he turned. Some say it was personal revenge. Nobunaga had humiliated Mitsuhide publicly, insulting him, even confiscating his lands. Others argue Mitsuhide saw an opportunity to seize power himself. But conspiracy theories swirl. Was Mitsuhide acting on behalf of the imperial court, tired of Nobunaga's brutality? Was he manipulated by rival clans, like the Mori or Uesugi? Or was it simply envy, the chance to kill the man everyone feared, and perhaps replace him? Whatever the motive, Mitsuhide's triumph was short-lived. Only 13 days after Nobunaga's death, Mitsuhide was killed at the Battle of Yamazaki by another of Nobunaga's generals, Toyotomi Hideyoshi. The betrayal that ended Nobunaga's reign merely opened the door for the next player in the bloody game. Legacy of the Demon King. Oda Nobunaga never lived to see Japan unified. That would fall to his successors. First, Hideyoshi. Then, Tokugawa Ieyasu. But Nobunaga's legacy is undeniable. He revolutionized Japanese warfare, breaking the power of the old feudal order. He embraced guns, trade, and modernization. He shattered the might of warrior monks and traditional clans. But his vision came at a terrible cost. Thousands dead, temples in ruins, and a reputation so terrifying that even today, his name carries a sense of dread. Nobunaga is remembered as both hero and villain, one who dreamed of a new Japan, but built it with fire and blood. And perhaps that's the truest image of him. A man who saw himself not as a servant of gods, but as a god in his own right. A demon king, striding across the land in chaos, daring anyone to stop him. In the end, Nobunaga's downfall reminds us that, in the brutal world of feudal Japan, betrayal was the sharpest sword of all. For all his brilliance, for all his terror, for all his ruthless vision, he could not predict the moment when loyalty would turn and fire would consume him. The temple of Honnoji still stands today, rebuilt after the flames, but its walls whisper the story of that night in 1582, when the most feared man in Japan learned that even demon kings can bleed. Feudal Japan was not just armies clashing on open fields. It was shadows in the night, betrayals whispered behind walls, and massacres carried out in the name of ambition. For every great warlord, there were monks burned alive on mountains, clans wiped out in sudden death, assassins waiting in the dark, and curses that lingered for centuries. These are the stories that rippled beneath the battles, the horrors and intrigues that shaped an age drenched in both honor and blood. The Siege of Mount Hiei, 1571. High above Kyoto, the monastery of Enryakuji stood as both a sacred place and a fortress. Its monks, known as Sohei, or warrior monks, wielded naginata as readily as prayer beads, and for centuries they had been a political force in Japan. They aligned with rival daimyos, harassed peasants, and posed a constant threat to Oda Nobunaga's ambitions. Nobunaga decided to end it permanently. In 1571, he surrounded Mount Hiei with his forces and ordered its destruction. The temple complex, once one of the most sacred sites in Japan, was set ablaze. The fire spread across wooden halls and ancient libraries, consuming priceless scriptures, statues, and relics. But it wasn't just the monks who perished. Eyewitnesses claimed Nobunaga's men slaughtered thousands indiscriminately. Monks, women, children, even animals. Streams of bodies littered the mountain paths. Survivors described the air choked with smoke and screams as the flames painted the sky red. For Nobunaga, this was more than a battle. It was an act of psychological terror, a message that resistance meant obliteration. The massacre horrified even his allies, but it cemented his reputation as a ruthless modernizer, willing to burn the old world to ash in order to build the new. To this day, the siege of Mount Hiei is remembered not as a military victory, but as one of the darkest massacres in Japanese history. The death of Takeda Shingen, 1573. Known as the Tiger of Kai, Takeda Shingen was one of the most formidable warlords of the Sengoku era. A brilliant tactician, his cavalry charges were legendary, striking fear into enemies across Japan. Even his greatest rivals, Nobunaga and Tokugawa Ieyasu, admitted his genius. But in 1573, the Tiger of Kai suddenly died. The circumstances remain mysterious. Official accounts say he succumbed to illness during a campaign. Others whisper he was struck by a bullet in battle, though few records confirm it. Some legends even suggest poison. His death sent shockwaves through Japan. Shingen had been poised to challenge Nobunaga directly, and without him, the mighty Takeda clan faltered. His son, Takeda Katsuyori, inherited leadership but lacked his father's brilliance. Within a decade, at the Battle of Nagashino in 1575, the Takeda cavalry was annihilated by Nobunaga's innovative use of arquebusers, musketeers firing in rotating volleys. The fall of the Takeda illustrates the fragility of power in Sengoku Japan. A single death, whether by illness, bullet, or betrayal, could unravel a dynasty built over generations. Shingen's banners once carried the motto, "Swift as the wind, silent as a forest, fierce as fire, immovable as a mountain." But in the end, even mountains can crumble. The legend of ninja espionage. In the shadows of the Sengoku Wars, not every battle was fought in daylight. Some wars unfolded in whispers, poison, and the silent footsteps of ninja. The provinces of Iga and Koga became infamous for their bands of covert operatives, trained in espionage, sabotage, and assassination. To the ruling warlords, these ninja were both a tool and a terror. The most famous clash came when Oda Nobunaga turned his wrath on Iga. The ninja resisted fiercely, using guerrilla tactics, night raids, and booby traps to bleed his forces. Nobunaga eventually crushed them in the Tensho-Iga War in 1581, slaughtering thousands and scattering the survivors. Yet legends persisted. Tales of assassins vanishing in smoke, walking on water, or scaling fortress walls under the cover of night. Historians debate how much of this was truth versus myth, but one thing is certain: the fear they inspired was real. For peasants, ninja were avengers, striking tyrants in the dark. For daimyos, they were shadows that could slip past walls and guards alike. For Nobunaga, they were an obstacle that had to be exterminated. Today, the word ninja conjures masks and martial arts. But in the Sengoku era, they were something more primal, the living embodiment of paranoia. Proof that in feudal Japan, you are never truly safe, even in your own castle, even behind locked doors. The Battle of Sekigahara, 1600. If Nobunaga's betrayal was a spark, the Battle of Sekigahara was the wildfire that reshaped Japan. On October 21st, 1600, the mist-covered valley of Sekigahara became the stage for the largest and bloodiest battle in Japanese history. On one side stood Tokugawa Ieyasu with his eastern army of 75,000. On the other, the western coalition of 120,000, nominally loyal to Hideyoshi's young heir. For hours, the clash raged. Spears clashed, muskets thundered, and arrows rained. The outcome should have favored the Western alliance. But in Sengoku, Japan, victory often came not from strength, but from betrayal. Key Western generals, secretly bribed or promised land by Ieyasu, turned mid-battle. Their armies wheeled around and struck their supposed allies from behind. Panic rippled through the Western ranks. By sundown, 30,000 men lay dead. Sekigahara was not just a battlefield, it was a graveyard where loyalty went to die. The Tokugawa shogunate would rule Japan for over 250 years, and it all began in the mist and blood of Sekigahara, where betrayal proved sharper than any blade. I'll share some more context on this one later. The Curse of Terra no Masakado, 10th century. Long before Nobunaga, Hideyoshi, or Ieyasu, Japan had already learned to fear betrayal and the restless dead it left behind. In the 10th century, a samurai named Tera no Masakado rebelled against the imperial court, briefly declaring himself the quote-unquote new emperor of Japan. His uprising was crushed, and he was decapitated. His head was sent to Kyoto as proof of victory. But the story didn't end there. According to legend, Masakado's severed head refused to rot. For months, it glared with open eyes, lips curling in rage. Eventually, the head was said to have flown through the air, landing in what is now modern Tokyo. Locals believed his spirit was vengeful, capable of curses and disasters. Even centuries later, during the Sengoku period, daimyos feared disturbing his grave. When Tokyo became the capital under Tokugawa rule, officials still held ceremonies to appease Masakado's spirit, terrified of inviting his wrath. To this day, his shrine in Tokyo remains a site of quiet reverence and fear. Office workers who dared to move it in the 20th century reported sudden deaths and strange accidents. Masakado's tale is a reminder that in Japan, the past is never truly buried. Betray a man, behead him, erase his line, and still,
his shadow may linger,
demanding vengeance from beyond. But the Sengoku era's story didn't end with flames on a mountain or whispers of ninja in the night. It reached its crescendo in the struggle for Japan's future, a contest between Nobunaga's successors. Toyotomi Hideyoshi, the commoner who rose to power through brilliance and brutality, and Tokugawa Ieyasu, the patient strategist who waited for the perfect moment to seize it all. Their collision would not just decide who wore the mantle of power. It would decide the fate of Japan for the next 250 years. The death of Oda Nobunaga at Honnoji in 1582 left a power vacuum at the very center of Japan. The Demon King had been betrayed, his ashes lost to fire, his empire left leaderless. But in Sengoku Japan, power never lay still for long. It shifted like smoke, flowing to the next ambitious warlord willing to seize it. And in this moment of chaos, two men stepped into the void. One was Toyotomi Hideyoshi, the cunning commoner who rose from sandal bearer to supreme ruler. The other was Tokugawa Ieyasu, the patient schemer who would outlast them all. Their story is one of intrigue, ambition, and the final bloody steps that forged a unified Japan. From sandal bearer to warlord. Hideyoshi's rise is one of the most unlikely in history. Born in 1537, he was the son of a poor farmer with no samurai lineage. In an age when bloodlines defined destiny, Hideyoshi had none of the pedigree required to lead. But what he lacked in heritage, he made up for in charisma, cunning, and relentless ambition. As a youth, he became a servant in Nobunaga's army, tending to menial tasks. There's a story, possibly apocryphal, that he once warmed Nobunaga's sandals against his chest before handing them to him on a freezing morning. Nobunaga was so impressed by the boy's loyalty and quick wit that he promoted him. From there, Hideyoshi rose like wildfire. He proved himself in diplomacy and battle alike, securing castles, negotiating alliances, and showing a talent for strategy that surprised even his superiors. By the time Nobunaga died, Hideyoshi was one of his most trusted generals, and perhaps the only man quick enough to seize the throne his master left behind. Avenging the Demon King. When Nobunaga was betrayed by Akachi Mitsuhide, most warlords hesitated, unsure of their next move. Hideyoshi did not. He immediately struck a truce with one of Nobunaga's enemies, pivoted his army, and marched against Mitsuhide with stunning speed. At the Battle of Yamazaki, only 13 days after Nobunaga's death, Hideyoshi crushed Mitsuhide's forces. Mitsuhide himself was killed while fleeing, cut down by bandits, his head displayed in disgrace. Hideyoshi had avenged his master, but he wasn't about to stop there. The rise of the monkey. Hideyoshi was no noble warrior. His appearance, short, wiry, with a monkey-like face, was often mocked by rivals. Nobunaga himself had once nicknamed him Saru, meaning monkey. But beneath that exterior was a genius for power. He maneuvered politically, marrying into powerful families, rewarding allies, and eliminating rivals with a blend of charm and brutality. Over time, he brought more and more of Japan under his control, not just through war, but through diplomacy and administration. He introduced land surveys, tax reforms, and laws that separated warriors from peasants, stabilizing society in ways Nobunaga never had. He built grand castles, including the magnificent Osaka Castle. He built them as symbols of his power. But even as he presented himself as a unifier, Hideyoshi was ruthless. Disloyal generals were executed, rivals were eliminated, and dissent was crushed without mercy. Hideyoshi, the peasant boy, was now the most powerful man in all of Japan. The Korean ambition. Yet, Hideyoshi was not content with ruling Japan. His ambition burned outward. In 1592, he launched the invasions of Korea, dreaming of using the peninsula as a bridge to conquer China. At first, Japanese forces swept through Korea with shocking success, capturing cities and striking deep into the country. But resistance stiffened. Chinese armies intervened, and the campaign collapsed into a brutal stalemate. The war drained Japan's coffers, devastated Korea, and left Hideyoshi's armies battered. When he tried again in 1597, the result was even worse. The monkey had reached too far, and in 1598, with Japan still mired in war, Hideyoshi fell ill and died. His dream of a Japanese empire across Asia died with him. A child heir, a hungry ally. Before his death, Hideyoshi named his young son Hideyori as his heir. He entrusted his generals to form a council of regents to protect the boy until he came of age. But, dear listener, as I'm sure you've picked up on by now, in Sengoku Japan, loyalty was always conditional. Among those regents was Tokugawa Ieyasu, patient, calculating, always watching. Ieyasu had been an ally of both Nobunaga and Hideyoshi. but he was no servant. He commanded his own territories in eastern Japan, and his clan's survival had been bought through centuries of cunning. While others squabbled and vied for influence over Hideyori, Ieyasu bided his time, strengthening his armies, forging alliances, and waiting for the inevitable clash. It came in 1600, at the field of Sekigahara. The Battle of Sekigahara. On October 21st, 1600, two massive armies faced off in the misty valleys of Sekigahara. On one side, Ieyasu and his eastern allies, about 75,000 strong. On the other, the western coalition loyal to Hideyoshi's heir, about 120,000. The battle was fierce, but the outcome was decided not by numbers, but by betrayal. Several Western generals secretly defected to Ieyasu's side mid-battle, turning on their allies and shattering morale. By the day's end, over 30,000 men lay dead. The West was broken. Ieyasu stood victorious. The fate of Japan had shifted once again, this time decisively. The fall of Osaka. After Sekigahara, Ieyasu consolidated power. In 1603, he was granted the title of shogun by the emperor, establishing the Tokugawa shogunate. But one loose end remained: Toyotomi Hideyoshi, Hideyoshi's young son, now grown. As long as Hideyori lived, he represented a rival clan, a beacon for those who still opposed Ieyasu. And so, in 1614, Ieyasu marched on Osaka Castle, the grand fortress Hideyoshi had built. The first siege ended in stalemate, but the second, known as the Summer Siege of 1615, was decisive. Tokugawa forces stormed Osaka, overwhelming defenders in a brutal assault. Hideyori and his mother took their own lives as the castle burned. The Toyotomi line was extinguished in blood and ash. From the chaos of Nobunaga's betrayal and Hideyoshi's ambition, Ieyasu emerged as the final victor. The Tokugawa Peace. For the next 250 years, Japan would be ruled by the Tokugawa shogunate. The era was marked by strict social order, isolation from the outside world, and relative peace, a stark contrast to the century of war that preceded it. But that peace was bought at a terrible cost. Countless lives lost in battles and betrayals, temples burned, clans erased, families annihilated. The Tokugawa dynasty outlasted them all. And yet, in the shadows of its stability, the ghosts of Nobunaga, Hideyoshi, and Hideyori still linger. Reminders of an age when ambition burned hotter than loyalty, and the only certainty was betrayal. The story of Nobunaga, Hideyoshi, and Ieyasu is not one of noble samurai standing in gleaming armor. It is a story of ambition without limits, betrayal without hesitation, and power bought with rivers of blood. Nobunaga was the fire. Hideyoshi was the flame that spread. And Ieyasu, well, Ieyasu was the ash that remained. Together, they forged a new Japan. But the way they did it reminds us of a truth as old as history itself. Power is never given. It is only taken. Feudal Japan is often remembered through the polished lens of samurai dramas, gleaming armor, noble duels, and loyalty unto death. But, as we've seen here, the real history was a bit darker. It was a world where loyalty shifted with the wind, where temples burned with their monks still inside, where betrayal toppled dynasties in a single night. Nobunaga, Hideyoshi, and Ieyasu were all different. Yet, they were also the same. They dreamed of uniting Japan, and they succeeded. But they built that unity not on honor or virtue, but on rivers of blood. In the end, the Sengoku period wasn't a tale of shining swords. It was a lesson etched in smoke and screams. Power is never inherited. It is stolen. And it is always, always paid for in death. And that, dear listeners, is another episode of Morbid History. I'm your host, Thomas Gloom. I just want to thank you for taking this thrilling journey with me. If you enjoyed this little audio excursion into the shadows of Japan's rich history, then please subscribe, leave a review wherever you listen, and come follow me on TikTok, where I consistently post all kinds of dark happenings and true crime mysteries. And remember, when you hear stories of loyalty, honor, and noble sacrifice, look closer. You might just find the knife in the dark, the flame on the mountain, or the mask hiding the ambition beneath. Stay curious, stay safe, and remember, history can be a lot of things, including morbid.